I had a woman after the NPR interview who reached out and told me she pulled over on the side of the road and she just cried because, I was talking about being a young mother, something that she felt like she could never talk about because of the stigma and the shame that was associated with that.
Okay, we are live, and I am talking today with someone who is a real hero of mine. This is Frank Schaeffer. You are either watching this on Facebook or YouTube or listening to it as a podcast or all the other interweb places. And I often introduce people as friends or as people I admire. But Nicole, who is with us today, Lynn Lewis, is the author of a wonderful book that we're going to be talking about a lot. But I have to just say something right up front, Nicole, that I don't know if you know this. I've got a new book coming out this November that talks about childcare. And I was in the last draft when I heard you on Fresh Air with Terry Gross, which I listened to while doing the school pickup for my granddaughter, Nora. And I've been on Fresh Air several years ago with a memoir I wrote called Crazy for God. And I like Terry a lot. And she interviewed you beautifully. And you're talking about finding a man who irons his own shirts. And you're talking about your book and the experience you had in college as a young mom in the winter, and your daughter is, getting sick and maybe pneumonia, and this callous teacher is treating you badly. And I'm just sitting there going, I wanted to call you up and say, tell me where your enemies live, because I was so into it. So when it was done, I looked up to see when the book was coming out, and it had either just come out or it was coming out the next week, and I ordered it on Kindle. And I want to get the name right, so I'm going to read it here because I screw everything up. So let me get this right. It is Pregnant Girl, and the subtitle is A Story of Motherhood, College, and Creating a Better Future for Young Families. And I'm going to talk about this book a lot. So I got the book, and I literally did what people do mythologically, but in my case was true. I sat up and I read it cover to cover, and I started highlighting passages. And I called my editor, and the book was in the final draft. And I said, I'm sorry, the book cannot come out in October. You're going to have to bump it because I need to include quotes and references to this book in my book. Hold it. So like a scene in an old movie, hold the press. So I delayed. I mean, you give other authors compliments, but when you delay the release of your own book.
Absolutely.
Okay, so before I get into anything else on this, I am going to read something I wrote about you, which says it better out of my book, which fits in with your book, by the way. The title of my book is Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy, and it comes out November 2nd. And in the introduction, and by the way, I talk about you in the book, I think 4 or 5 times. Wow. I have some quotes, and I put you right into my introduction. Like you help, I get you to help craft my book by putting this on page 26 and 27. I don't know if you can see this. And it says right here, my hero, Nicole Lynn Lewis.
Oh, wow.
That's the subtitle, in case anybody mistakes where I'm coming from. When I compare my journey to that of many other people who face struggles and young parenthood and less privileged circumstances, I feel ashamed to even describe my life as a struggle. For instance, a hero of mine is Nicole Lynn Lewis. Lewis serves as the Chief Executive Officer of Generation Hope, an organization she founded in 2010. She is author of the memoir, Pregnant Girl, A Story of Teen Motherhood, College, and Creating a Better Future for Young Families. Generation Hope's mission is to surround teen parents and their children with mentors, emotional support, and financial resources that they need to thrive in college. This supportive, compassionate vision is the result of Lewis's own struggle as a young parent, which she describes so movingly in Pregnant Girl. Lewis calls for better support of young families so they can thrive. She reflects on her experiences as a Black mother who got pregnant at age 17, which, by the way, is the same age that I got my girlfriend Jeannie pregnant.
Wow.
Which is why you sort of jumped off the page to me. And found herself as a college student fighting for opportunities for herself and her child in a system that had little to no room or sympathy for people like her. And since my book is a journey of what I call reparenting through your grandchildren, doing what I wish I'd done the first time around, beginning with getting my girlfriend, Jeannie, who I've been with 52 years now, pregnant when we were 17 and 18.
Wow.
To say that your book, Pregnant Girl, resonated with me is like an understatement. I held the presses, I rewrote sections of the book, and I talk about you about 4 or 5 times through the book, including quotes. So I just want to say, all hyperbole aside, all BS aside, you genuinely are a hero of mine. I love your book. I don't
Thank
like
you
it.
so
I
much.
love it. And it came like a kind of I don't know how to put this. You know how when you're working on a long project and you wonder if there's anybody else out there? When I heard you on Fresh Air, it was like the cavalry has arrived.
Wow.
And I found my project's guardian angel in you. Okay, now I'll shut up before I sound crazy. Let me just thank you for writing the book. And let me start by asking you, I heard you on Fresh Air, and I know you've done all sorts of things. I follow you on Twitter. How is the book being received? I know it's being received well, but how is it being received?
Yeah, well, first of all, I have to say thank you for those kind words. And I'm so glad that you reached out and just shared your story with me. And I felt that connection as you talked about your journey as young parents. So I'm really glad to be here. The book has been, I've had so many pinch myself moments, in terms of how this book has been received out in the world. I mean, interviewing with Terry Gross, on Fresh Air, being the book was Steph Curry, the NBA players, his September book club pick, last month, New York Times review. I mean, things that I never imagined when I first started writing this book. And I think what has been the most amazing part of how this book has been received is people reaching out all over the country, and saying, like, this is my story. And I had a woman after the NPR interview who reached out and told me she pulled over on the side of the road and she just cried because, I was talking about being a young mother, something that she felt like she could never talk about because of the stigma and the shame that was associated with that. And I think those are the most heartwarming, amazing moments of all of this, is just the connection with people all over the country.
Well, something I'd just like to add, I've written maybe 15, 16 books, and I've had a couple bestsellers and some that have sunk like stones into a pond, leaving no ripple whatsoever. It's like, what the hell happened there? So it isn't like all success stories, but if I may humbly say, you're a real writer. There's a lot of people who write books about a life experience, or they're a celebrity author, or they have one thing they write about. I hope someday to read a novel by you. I hope you keep writing because you've really got the chops. I mean, from my humble opinion, one of the reasons your book is so powerful is that it's not just the story drew me in, your writing draws me in. I love your writing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I try to write the book that I would want to read. That's important to me, right? Like, what would I want to read? How would I want to be brought into a story? And so that's kind of, as I write, that's what I ask myself, like, how would I want to, experience this story? But I hope to keep writing. I would love for this to be the first of many. I don't know, maybe one day 15 or 16.
You've got all these wonderful stories, of course, in your book about yourself, and hard stories like the one, where you're in a college class with an unsympathetic teacher who makes you bring a sick child, and that kind of level of disrespect. And I'm sitting there reading this wondering, is that because you're Black? Is that because you're a woman? Is that because you're a young mom? And I figured it all of the above. And I can just remember as a teenage father sitting with my wife while our baby was being born in Switzerland, of all places, and just how the midwife and the doctors treated us pretty disrespectfully. Like, what do you think you're doing? They were not gentle, and we're white and in a privileged position. And I can only imagine the crap you had to put up with, even the nonverbal stuff, the looks and everything else. And I want you to talk a little bit about that part of the experience, because, aside from everything else, just the experience of young parenthood, which I've been through as a teen father myself, with a teenage girl bearing a child and trying then to, put the rest of our lives back together. I think that part of your story is really interesting, but it's also a comment on the rest of our culture and the way our culture is so anti-family. They talk about pro-life, they talk about family values, And I'll just lay it out here. I think if you designed a society that essentially looked as if it hated children and mothers and families, the United States of America right now would be it. No support, no help. One thing that strikes me about Generation Hope is you're doing the job that any good society would already have been doing.
Right, right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
riff on all that. I said too much.
No, it's a lot there, but I think you're spot on. I mean, it's interesting. I was just on a call yesterday with some folks from a college that had read Pregnant Girl as a part of their book club. And two women on the call talked about how they went to college in their 40s and they were student parents, they had children. But, the reception that they got was, wow, this is great, right? Like, good for you. And these are two white women.
Yeah.
And they talked about how they, in my book, realized the disparity in how young mothers of color, fathers of color are treated when they go to get their education versus white women, older white women who maybe, have been homemakers or, they're changing careers and are parents and mothers. So I think absolutely within the student parent kind of umbrella, as students of color, you're definitely treated differently. And it's almost the layers of othering that you have, right? You are a young parent, which carries its own stigma. You are a woman, which carries its own stigma. You are a Black student, a brown student, all of those things. And I describe it in Pregnant Girl as a scarlet letter, right? Like, you can't hide the fact that you're parenting. You can't hide the fact that you're a student of color. So people make assumptions about you. They're looking at you. They're casting judgment on you. And, I mean, people looked at me walking around campus as a Black student at William and Mary, already having assumptions about whether or not I had earned my place at that college, such a prestigious school, never mind having my daughter, my toddler, like walking hand in hand with me. That really, I think, challenged people in a lot of different ways. So it's extremely difficult to not just be a student parent or a young parent, but to be a student of color and have all those layers happening at the same time.
Yeah, just remind people you're watching In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. My guest is Nicole Lynn Lewis, and she is the founder and CEO of, and I'm getting the name right because I said it wrong before, Generation Hope. And we're talking about her book, Pregnant Girl, and about her life. When I got Jeannie pregnant when we were 17 and 18 back in 1968, I'm the son of a fundamentalist Protestant missionary. We were in Switzerland, so it was in a small fundamentalist community. And, but what was interesting about that is we got a lot of support because one of the good parts of that community is that there was some backup for people. And because we did the quote right thing and got married, that's not why we got married. Jeannie and I were in love then, we're in love now. We were fortunate. That's just luck. I mean, who were those kids? I have no idea, but the grown-up lady I live with right now, before I drove down here to New York this morning and set up for this podcast, I got up a little earlier so I could clean the kitchen. So I don't iron my own shirts like the man in your book does, but I do clean the kitchen.
That's also great.
So what I'm trying to say is that I have left that evangelical path and I'm on the progressive side of politics, and I was on the right wing back in the 70s and 80s. And my father was a very famous right-wing activist at that time. But what was interesting is that we got the kind of support you didn't get, because in that little Christian community, they kind of circled the wagons, and we lived in a welfare state, which was so crazy because my dad became a leader of the religious right. Now it's all against, they call anything socialism to help people, but they paid our medical bills. We had a free place to live.
Wow.
My parents hired a tutor so I can continue with my education as a teen father who also was working. We were given access to the communal dining room, and I had 3 sisters, all with children, living in the same community. So there was no question of babysitting and help and advice. And so, as a fundamentalist child of a missionary getting this girlfriend pregnant, it was totally frowned upon. But on the other hand, when the chips were down, we got the kind of support that you're actually providing for people through your organization. So let me just ask, if you wrote another book, would you tell some of those stories? Because I love to see the posts you put on Twitter and other places about some of the things you're doing, but also just some of the people you've been working with, some of the young people. Can you talk about them a little bit and the support you give them, which I was so fortunate to get, and you got in some ways from your mom, but not from the school or anybody official.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I think to your earlier point, well, we talk about family, and supporting family, but we are talking about certain families.
Yes.
We're not talking about all families, and certainly young families, particularly if you're low income, if you're, a student of color, a young person of color. Those are not the families that we as a society are comfortable with, saying, hey, we're going to rally around you. We're going to provide you with resources that can make sure that you are able to thrive, like you were able to do and Jeannie was able to do. And that's really what we do at Generation Hope every day. We are a holistic wraparound model for our families. There's really nothing that is off the table for them to come to us and say, hey, I need help with, right? Because anything can derail you from college as a parent. It could be a domestic violence situation. It could be housing. So we do the academic, help you pick your classes kind of stuff, but we're also in the trenches with you if you have any sort of life interruption. And then we're also, we are a 2-gen model in that we're not just focusing on the parent, but we're also focusing on the child's academic success, because it's really hard to be successful as a parent if you're worried about your child and whether they're getting, the academic supports that they need. So we're really holistically supporting the entire family. And it's been, I started the organization in 2010. It's been an incredible journey just to grow this organization and to be able to innovate in the ways that we've been able to innovate and have a lot of it grow out of my own experience as a young mother. But now what is really driving our work is the voices of our scholars, are the voices of our scholars. And they are just incredible. And I do weave some of their stories throughout Pregnant Girl. But absolutely, I think there's an opportunity for us to continue to kind of show Generation Hope as a national model for how to do this work, and to show our students as just incredibly resilient and flying in the face of so many of the stereotypes that are out there. 90% of our students are students of color. And so, every day they are, proving all of these stereotypes wrong in various ways. Whether it's, young fathers are not committed to their families, or young parents and parenting students don't care about, going to college. Every day they're breaking through those stereotypes, and it's an honor to be able to work with them.
Well, we'll get back to the interview here in a minute, but just to pause and say something. Obviously, we're going to be linking everything that we're doing today when it goes on podcast or on YouTube or on Facebook. Ernie, my producer and friend, will be linking to everything you do. So those who want to support you and follow you are going to have an easy time doing so. And I would encourage everybody to do that. But I wanted to just mention something to you, and you can pass this on to Grace Mangino, your executive assistant, who very kindly set everything up. And we love Grace because she always responds. Grace is great. Ernie is my Grace. You have great. Grace is your Grace. Without Grace and Ernie, nothing happens.
Exactly.
But anyway, so thank Grace for me. She's been wonderful to work with. But
I will definitely do that.
Grace and you together can think about something, and that is that I would love to tell some of those stories by interviewing some of those younger people. So if you have a young father who's breaking those stereotypes, you have a young mother, and on my program, having written a book myself about childcare, rooted in 12 years of taking care of 3 of my 5 grandchildren, because my son, who was in the Marine Corps and fought in Afghanistan, lives across the road, and he and his wife work full time. And rather than putting them in preschool or something like that, Jeannie and I kind of took a semi-early retirement, and we just became the childcare people, not because we had to, but we wanted to. We wanted another bite at that apple. We've loved it. But the funny thing is, when I talk with young parents with young kids, they think, oh, well, you're older and that was years ago for you. But actually, I understand what they're doing better than a lot of their contemporaries do, because I'm planning school pickups for a 7-year-old. I've been taking care of toddlers, giving baths, changing diapers, reading stories, taking them out, fighting to have times in nature away from screens, all that stuff. So the weird thing is, in some ways, I know this sounds odd, but as an old white guy pushing 70, I have more in common with some young mom or dad walking down the street pushing a stroller than I do with people my age, because
Right.
so few grandparents are
Yes.
as involved as I am, which is part of my book, saying, what's wrong with you people? These are the best years of my life. I love helping with childcare. I wouldn't trade it for anything. And I'm running, by the way, I'm running out of babies because Nora's my youngest now, and she's 7, and I don't know what I'm going to do. So I'm hoping that somebody needs some help nearby. But anyway, that was a long way of saying that if you, Nicole or Grace, thinks of someone or a story, because I know you post things and you'd say, this would make a good interview, or a group, 2 or 3, think of us, because I would love to promote what you're doing. And I'd love to do it by talking to the people you're helping from a college dorm or from home. And if they want to hold their baby while they talk, fine.
No, I love that. And that's a big part of, what we believe is really going to be impactful in this work is having our students share their stories.
Well, let them share them on my podcast, and
we'll
promote the
definitely
heck out
talk
of
about it. Yeah, we'll definitely talk about it.
Set it up. Well, let's work on that, because I'd make that a regular feature. I don't mean a one-time thing. I would, if I did 5 or 10 podcasts a year with young people you're helping, fine.
Yeah, no, I think we should definitely talk about it.
I'd love to do that.
Yeah.
So anyway, that enough said. Let me just read something else where I quote you. This comes later, page 172, in a chapter in my book called A Loneliness Epidemic. And I managed to find a way that I think you fit very well in with that. As we have seen, there is very little support. There was very little support for Nicole Lewis when she attended college with a child in tow. Lewis is working to change that because so few others, let alone the government, stepped up. Generation Hope rallies around teen parents to help them earn college degrees to forge a path to economic opportunity. Generation Hope is now expanding its work with young parents beyond the DC region by sharing its best practices to help colleges, universities, and other schools across the country better meet the needs of nearly 4 million parenting students, an amazing number, by the way, who are working toward their degrees. In just 10 years, Lewis has created a unique and thriving organization that is gaining national attention for whole family approach to dismantling poverty. And then here's my question, but why isn't this a program on the level of Social Security? So I'm going to ask you that. I mean, what is wrong with our legislative program that it comes down to Nicole Lynn Lewis doing what any sane, decent, compassionate, empathetic society would have already been doing? No brainer. Obviously, this is going to pay for itself dividends for decades as you go down the generations. What is wrong with the United States of America today, Nicole, as we talk together, that this isn't so obvious that every single federal program already is dedicated to this and all the states also picking up the slack? Why are you doing this, and why hasn't the government done this? What is the problem?
Well, I think there's so many reasons. I think taking a big step back, our higher ed system, was not designed for the majority of today's college students. It was designed for a very narrow population, really white males. And the early colonial colleges, one of which I attended, the College of William and Mary, really they solidified the DNA for our higher ed system in this country. And William and Mary had a tobacco plantation with slaves that worked that plantation. You could bring your slave to campus with you, in its early days. So all of that, when we think about how do we transform a higher education system to now serve students of color, parenting students, first generation students, the list goes on in terms of groups that have been pushed to the fringes. It's a huge shift that really needs to take place, because our entire system is designed without those students in mind. And, from a policy perspective, our policy has followed that DNA of the college, the way that our higher ed system is set up. So it is not looking at this incredible opportunity that we have with a population like parenting college students and saying, imagine the return on investment if we remove barriers for this population to go to college and to complete college, the generational impacts that would happen. It's not just a benefit to that parent, but it's a benefit to their child. My daughter, who was 3 months old when I started at William & Mary, is now in her senior year of college. And so, my life is an example of what can happen when we remove these barriers and when we invest in this population. But the reality is that a huge shift needs to take place, and an acknowledgement of the fact that these policies and these practices have been, really exclusive, and they have been oppressive at times, and have kind of intentionally left too many students behind. That all needs to be named and recognized and acknowledged, and at an institutional level, and then at a federal and local and state level. And so there's a lot of shifting that needs to happen to get us to that place.
Yeah, I'd make a couple of comments. One is that one of the conceits of the university world, and I do quite a bit of speaking on campuses around the country and have for years as an author, piecing together an income for my family while my books sink like a stone into ponds, leaving no ripples except for a few bestsellers. By the way, Pregnant Girl was chosen by Stephen Curry as his, at his, I guess it's called the Literati Book Club pick for September. So congratulations on that.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I resent most authors' successes, but not yours.
I appreciate that.
It's like there's, people tell me I'm going to write a book. It's like, don't write a book. What do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a surgeon. Well, then I'm going to, do cardiovascular surgery.
That's right.
Keep your day job. But in your case, because you're a really great writer, I don't resent it. But and you have a mission. But in any case, what I wanted to say is I think there's also, to even step back further, we were talking about a culture designed by white men for white men.
Yes.
And that, of course, is the colleges. By the way, my dad went to college in the South in the 1920s and 30s at Hampton, Sydney. And I visited years later as a featured speaker because he had become well known. And after he passed, they brought me in to speak. And I visited the church, and they had a slave gallery upstairs where the young gentlemen, because it was a men's college at the beginning, could bring their personal servant, slave. They had quarters for them, and they were allowed to come to church. They had to sit upstairs in the balcony.
Wow.
And when you look at the dates, it's so recent that it's just shocking because, my father was there in the 20s and 30s, and there were caretakers on the grounds in those days who had been there as slaves originally, which is pretty mind-blowing. It's that recent.
Yeah.
But anyway, change the subject. To back off what you were saying, I think there's another frame also engineered by white interests and white men, and that is the way the business community is structured. And so, for instance, my daughter happens to be a CEO here in New York City at a company that does investment packages for environmental environmental energy policy type stuff. And she was saying, until COVID came along, you kind of had to hide the fact you even had a family. You go to a meeting, you don't say you're doing a school pickup. Oh, no, I'm in the office. You have to lie because families aren't cool. It's designed by 1940s and 1950 white businessmen who pretend they don't even have wives and children or families, let alone any other obligation. And so, women are told, well, you can play in you can play in the play park now, but you got to do it, pretend as if you're a white man in 1950 to do this. Don't talk about school pickups. Don't talk about a room to breastfeed in. Don't talk about pumping milk at work. Don't talk about the fact you're having your period and don't want to take a meeting. Pretend you're a white man and we'll sort of let you in the door.
Right.
And then it must just quadruple infinitely when now you're a Black woman on top of that.
Right.
And so it isn't just that our culture doesn't have room for a mother in college, white or Black, let alone Black. It's that the business world tells that woman later, what are you even doing with the child? You should wait until you have IVF when you're 47 and your biological clock is almost ticked over, because we want to squeeze all the juice out of the best part of your life and we don't want it going to husband. We don't trust women. We don't
Right.
want them to become business people. You might go have a baby.
Right.
So there's, it's not just in the colleges. There's no room in this culture for families, period. And that goes for men who want to take paternity leave for more than a couple of weeks, say, I want to stay home with and help with my toddlers for 2 years. And by the way, when I come back, I still want to have a job and I don't want to lose credibility. There's no room for them either.
No, I think you're spot on and you're absolutely right. And I think the pandemic has really shown, how bad and devastating that structure of things has been for our country. Because, you look at how families have fared in this, and it's been devastating because, we already had a really fragile child care system. We already had, like you said, a working environment that didn't celebrate family, think about, you would show up to work sick because you were afraid you would lose your job. You would sometimes have your kids go to school sick because you were afraid you were going to lose your job. And now the pandemic really showed that is not healthy. It's not how we should be running our country. It's not what we should value. And I think particularly when you look at who has suffered the most in the pandemic, it has been mothers, Black and brown mothers, and even the most significant employment losses have been specifically for young mothers. So when we think about who is most impacted by that structure, that too.
There's an interesting statistic that I cited in my book that I got out of an article in the New York Times by someone very credible. It wasn't an op-ed or something. It was like real sciencey stuff. And then it kind of disappeared as a news story. And I think because it didn't fit anybody's agenda. It was just kind of like a little fact that got floated out there. And then I never heard about it again. And I'm always suspicious when something gets my attention, like, wow, are you kidding me? And then it's like, wait a minute, did I really read that? Oh yeah, I did. And I quoted in my book. And that is that doctors around the US and also in other parts of the world where they were keeping statistics said that the article was, where have all the preemies gone? And because there were so many women who were at home resting and taking better care of themselves because they were stuck, nobody realized that actually the number of premature births and miscarriages plummeted. And one of the statistics they kept was right here in New York City, where I'm sitting right now doing this interview with you in a friend's apartment. I live in northern Massachusetts, and I read that, and these were documented, and it wasn't just hearsay. It was actually numbers, because Scandinavian countries, France, Switzerland, Germany, America, we keep track of health issues enough so that we know how many premature babies there are at any given time. But just think about that. So basically, the very thing corporate America won't do for a pregnant woman, COVID forced on us.
Right.
And that is, you're pregnant, we're not going to make you hustle and come back to work too quickly, or this, that. You're going to actually be able to get a little rest, not because we like you, but because we had to send you home now.
Right.
And I read that and I thought, wow, once in a while we get a memo from Mother Nature.
Yeah.
And I just looked at that thinking, yeah, that's a memo.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I actually came across that same statistic too, somewhere, maybe scrolling, on Twitter or something like that. And it makes perfect sense. It's like you said, at Generation Hope, one of the things that I was really passionate about, because I started Generation Hope with 2 daughters. I had my oldest daughter, but then my youngest daughter was 10 months old when I started Generation Hope. So I wanted to build a culture, a work environment that was very family friendly, not only because of our mission, but because I had been in those situations where, I was forced to make those really difficult decisions between like the health of my family and, my career. And so also, I think it speaks to, we need to have more people with lived experiences, women in decision-making, roles throughout corporate America, throughout our working, organizations, to be able to say, this is how we're going to structure, our work life. This is how we're going to, grow our company. We're going to value family. We're going to value that balance. The statistics show that we just don't have that enough. We have work to do there.
Yeah, and of course, it also is changing the culture of what's expected of men, because what's insane is I know, my daughter, her kids, who are now my two oldest grandchildren, she raised them basically in Scandinavia, in Finland. So there, if you have a baby, there's a visiting nurse comes twice a week to check on you. You get a year of maternity and paternity leave and a stipend from the government. So either the male or the female or the pair bonded partners, lesbian, gay, whatever, somebody can stay home. They don't differentiate between the two. And it's against the law to mess with their job when they get back. And since enough men take it, there's no stigma. So it's not like it's a no-brainer.
Right.
What's the result? Lower maternity mortality rates, lower infant mortality rates, less miscarriages, less trouble during not just pregnancy, but healthcare for young children and so forth. Why are things like that so far-fetched in our culture? It isn't just a question of family policy. It's a question of the way we define you, Nicole Lynn Lewis, as the CEO of Generation Hope, instead of as a woman in a relationship. We don't define your success by the quality of your relationship with the people you love. We define it by whether you've got a PhD or whether you are a president of a company or a CEO. And I think the whole idea of success in the business community is what drives this kind of hard-assed college stigma too, because it's not about relationships. It's not about love. It's not about empathy. It's about a hard-driving economy that is geared to the GDP and will grind up anybody that gets in the way. And that includes a mom showing up in class with a sick baby one night, as you did. Because what are you even doing here? And then you mix in the black thing and it's a whole even bigger thing. But it just seems to me, and I know I sound like a broken record, but our culture is geared against looking at relationships, empathy, and love as something real. And we treat them like a Disney fairy tale, when of course science tells us, which is what I've been studying for the last 5 years for the project I'm involved with, that love is not only real, it is the motivation that evolution gave us for that 3 a.m. feeding,
Right.
to not just throw the baby out the window. It's the motivation that I've had to stay married for 52 years and be forgiven by my wife after being an idiot and being this sort of macho fool that came out of an evangelical background where men are supposed to be in charge of everything. And she gradually weaned me away from that idea of male supremacy and all this crap. But that's what I hope I'm remembered for: a grandfather, a father that made mistakes with his kids and then turned around and tried to fix it. A man that, brings his wife a cup of coffee in the morning because he's so damn grateful that she stuck with him through his stupid phase of thinking he's in charge of everything and bossing her around like a real idiot. Why didn't she leave? Well, because she's very strong and she hung in there and she loved me. I don't, that's what I would hope that my grandchildren would take away from our home. And I'm sure you're the same. But we're living in a stupid culture, which is all about career definition. I want you to talk about that, because I think your book gets into that obliquely, but the message is very similar to the one I'm trying to share here.
Yeah, no, I mean, I even think, to your point, one of the things that I'm asked a lot when it comes to how did I stay the course going to college as a mom, dealing with housing insecurity, dealing with food insecurity, all of the things that were working against me, what kept me going? It was my daughter, right? It was the motivation was my daughter and my love for her and wanting her to have the best life that she could possibly have. And, college was always a given for me when I was growing up, but it changed when I became a mom. It was not just about me. It was now so much more important. It was now about my daughter and giving her the life that she deserved. And I think any young parent and any parenting student that you talk to will tell you the same thing. That's the biggest motivation is your child. So when you're thinking about what matters most in the world, what is most important, it is those relationships. And, I tell people also, my full-time job is mom. I have 5 children spanning from 22 to 4 months old. And so that's my full-time job. That's my most important job. That's like you. I want to be remembered for being the best mom and wife that I can be. everything else is secondary to that. But like you said, that's not popular, and it's not valued, I think, in the way that it should be valued. And so I think that's all wrapped up in how do we treat young parents? How do we talk about teen pregnancy? How do we treat parenting college students? The policy changes that need to be in place to make sure that all families can really thrive. It's all wrapped up in that.
Yeah, and speaking of which, when people ask me, what do you do? Sometimes I'm interviewed on podcasts or TV or something. I used to sort of cut to the more professional stuff, and now I say, well, do you really want to know what I do, or are you just asking how I'm employed or what my job is? Because I'll tell you what I do, and then I describe the childcare that I'm involved with my grandchildren, and I say, I've got to tell you, and I said this to an interviewer the other day. I said, I got to be honest with you. I really don't care about, this interview and what you're asking me other than this. I said, I've got to tell you, if two lines were forming and at one was a red button, I push that, my next book is a bestseller and everything happens and you're interviewing me. And I said, if I had to choose between pushing that button or doing the school pickup today with Nora, I promise you, hand on heart, I'm taking Nora to the beach. I have her bathing suit in the back of the van. Her snack is packed. I wouldn't even be a thought in my mind to cancel that and do this other thing related to career, because I'm going to be 70 next year. And I can't remember any career milestones as important to me. But the fact that my 13-year-old granddaughter, Lucy, who's the oldest of the three youngest, calls me and texts me with her news of who her friends are, what she's doing. And then on a weekend says, Ba, they call me Ba, B-A, I'm coming down to the barn because I have an old barn that I built a studio for the kids to do woodwork and stuff in next to my house. I'll be in the barn. If you see the light on, it's me. If you want to come by and say hi, that would be great. Now she's 13 when you start pulling away from people. That's my prize. That's my Pulitzer Prize right there. And I'm being honest when I tell you, sure, I want my next book to sell, but in comparison with having that lively, wonderful, invigorating, youth prolonging relationship with a granddaughter who's at an age when people pull away and yet she still wants to be with her grandfather. All right. That's one I put on my punch list of like, okay, good. That worked. I'm glad. I'm happy. The other stuff is interesting. It's great. But I totally get you, what you're talking about being a mother first and so forth. And I am a grandfather first and a hands-on caregiver. And I think there's a lot of us out there, by the way, but we're told by the white controlled business community, oh, well, that's all nice stuff for, Christmas and vacations and all this stuff. But, now let's get back to what's really important. And I don't think that stuff that's really important is really important. I think what we're talking about is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 100% agree. And I think, that's the work that we have to do. The change we have to create in the world is helping to get us back to what's most important and not the good old days, right? Because the good old days are really days that are just reinforcing that the structure that you just described. It's creating a new kind of version of this country that is really focused on exactly what you said, the things that are most important and relationships and people and family and love. And I'm hoping that the book Pregnant Girl, contributes to that it helps people think differently and challenges our notions about what is normal and what is right and, all of that.
Well, I think it does. And, it spoke to me so deeply. I mean, here we are, you're much younger than me. And you look much younger. It seems crazy that you have children, but of course I started young too. So, people see my 28-year-old granddaughter, Amanda, and they say, well, what's going on here? And I say, yeah, that's my granddaughter. I say, look, I got Jeannie pregnant at 17. Jessica dropped out of NYU at 20, went to Finland, had a baby at 22. Do the math, you can have granddaughters. Yeah. So anyway, I get it. But what's interesting to me about your book, Pregnant Girl, is that it affirms, I think the social scientist type people in Washington probably like the idea that you're helping kids go through college. I read it a different way. And that is, you are affirming a much more basic life decision. And that is that parenthood is actually a good thing. not
Right.
like, oh, this was a tragedy, but we're going to help you get through this accident and go to school anyway and get your kid in childcare as soon as you can so you can go have that big important career. Your message is, wait a minute, you were lucky to have this child, and now let's make the rest of your life work to support this, because you're fortunate you've stumbled into something wonderful. And that's what I took from your book, that you stumbled into something wonderful, and that includes all the hard stuff, but that you've come out the other side of that as this kind of luminous example of not turning something bad into something good because you went to school, but looking at this life as something wonderful of being a mother, a parent, a spouse in a partnered relationship that's working. And so I take away from Pregnant Girl this life affirming, beautiful, glowing example of everything I care about. So to me, the book is terribly moving that way. And yeah, I'm glad people go to school, and I want people to finish high school, and so on and so on. But what I love about your book is the warmth toward the relationships.
Thank you. No, that means a lot. And, I do think that so much of our response to teen pregnancy is exactly that. You made a mistake, this horrible thing has happened, now we got to fix it. And that's, something I even say in the book is that, teen parents are not a problem to be fixed, right?
I read that line, I underlined it about 20 times, and I
Right.
showed Jeannie.
Yes. And that's the way we look at, young parents, and
Yeah.
And it's damaging, and it communicates so much. It communicates that something is wrong with you.
Yeah.
And so I think to your point is one of my colleagues read the book early on and described it as a love letter to young families and young
Yes.
parents. And I hope it is, because as you said, I want it to challenge that way that we talk about them, that we respond to them, and to really say that you're loved and you're already amazing just as you are. And what we do at Generation Hope is when they say, hey, I want to go to college, we say, okay, let's do that. Let's remove the barriers to help you get there.
Sure.
But I also want to remind them that even without the degree, they are incredible. They are amazing. They're doing wonderful things. And sometimes you get so stuck on the next step, and that degree is like, okay, once I get that degree, then I'll be accomplished, amazing, all of those things. And I want them to know that in the moment right now, they are incredible and amazing right now. Which I don't think I probably told myself enough when I was in their shoes.
Yeah. And I love that aspect of your book. And I just think it's such a wonderful thing to pass on to people, whether it's from you or me or anybody else listening. And that is, as I look back at my life and I read Nicole's book, I don't see getting pregnant at 17 and 18 as a tragedy that we then had to live down and figure out how to get around. I see it the exact opposite. And that is that, I have friends, many friends, and as I'm sure you do, who sort of waited till they were 47 and decided to try to have a child. And after $180,000 in medical expenses and failed IVF treatments, and then trying to figure something out with a surrogate mom or whoever it is, they have gotten to places in their life where the big fancy career doesn't seem quite as important as it once did. And they could have done with a little more serendipity of unplanned, straight up happenstance that would have left them, as they're heading into their 50s and their 60s and 70s. There's a lot of lonely people out there. And what I love about what you do is, the college degree is nice and all the rest of that stuff, but you're helping people realize a full life. And to me, that's what you do. And college is a tool, but the child is a real gift. And that's the way I see it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that part of a full life is also pursuing your passions, like when I think about our students, they want to be nurses, they want to be teachers, they want to, work in social justice. And I think our society tells them that once they have a baby that they can't pursue their passions anymore. And I think when you're a parent who's able to pursue your passions, you're a better parent to that child, right? You're able,
I totally agree.
The full life, right, is the
Totally
best
agree.
gift that we can give to our children. So I think it all comes full circle, is like helping these young people discover and pursue their passions and be, be able to fully be present and show up for their children in that way is also a huge gift.
Well, Jeannie and I were so lucky because the first 10 years of our marriage, and then we did sort of what you did, although your husband is not the person you had your first child with, but we were fortunate. And that would have been my case, by the way, if the girlfriend before Jeannie had gotten pregnant. It would not have worked out looking back. So that's just the luck of the draw. I threw the dice, stupid. I mean, who were those people? But we were lucky. And then in the end, you got lucky too, but in a different sort of a way. But that was a different journey. But that said, I look back at the support I got from my parents, and they sort of did for us what you're doing for so many people. And then I look at what we're doing for my children as caregivers. We're not telling them don't have a career or realize your dreams. You're a mom now, stay home. It's exactly the opposite. Right. I'm doing full-time childcare as a grandfather. And I don't mean my wife does it and I pretend. I do it. Okay. Right. This is for real. Because I believe in my daughter-in-law having a career as the bursar at a school. I believe in my daughter, Jessica, having a career. And she's a CEO of a company now. I have encouraged them to go do those things. And the same thing for my son, John. I do the school pickups. He's been working from home, but he's still working after COVID, I mean, because I believe in them and I know they're happier because they have vibrant, real careers.
Right.
So my whole thing about childcare is not, hey, don't do family, this is, children are great. They're so much more important, stay home. I'm saying rather to grandparents, hey, the traditional model is grandparents help raise kids so kids can do this other stuff.
Right.
That's the traditional model, and our culture's fallen apart. The traditional model's dying out. I don't know why. We'll get into that on another. I have a whole chapter on grandparenthood in my book, but interestingly enough, another little fact that nobody wants to talk about, the single biggest predictor in the Berlin study of aging longevity is not whether you smoke or not or have diabetes, it's whether you have daily interaction with a grandchild.
Yes, I've seen that study. I sent it to my mom.
Yeah, there you go. So you want to live a long time, don't freeze your brain when you die, don't upload your head into a computer and live forever. Just do some childcare and step up so your daughter and your son-in-law and whomever can have careers.
Right.
And if that doesn't happen, then how about we pay for some really first-class childcare that's creative and not all screens and crap, and build layers of support. So I'm totally with you on that. Don't get me wrong. That said, as I look at my own life, and what I treasure most, it's not the high points of any piece of career I can point to. It's the relationship with my children and grandchildren. And I'm not alone in that. I think that's pretty common. But you wouldn't know. But you wouldn't know it if you go to an American college and hear them talking to kids,
right? Because
they're telling them all about everything else except what actually, when they get to be my age, they're going to care about. How do you figure that, Nicole? Answer that. What do you think? Why are they doing that?
Well, I think it reinforces all the systems that are in place, right? You got to talk to people about those things so that that's what they go and value when they go out into the world. It kind of keeps the machine going, if you will. But I think, was it Warren Buffett who I heard in an interview or read in an interview, one of the most influential things for his success, he said, was his wife. He's been married, I think, twice, and choosing the right spouse. And so I think that goes back to what you're saying around, here's Warren Buffett, who, by traditional standards is successful because he's, made all this money, but he didn't cite some algorithm for making investments or, he talked about one of the biggest influences to his success was choosing the right spouse. So relationships are really key.
Well, who's written a lot about that, and I disagree with his politics sometimes because I'm more to the left, but David Brooks, the New York Times columnist, has written column after column after column, sort of warning younger people, saying, you're really going to regret this path to success if it foregoes relationships. Doing the next cool thing is not what you will remember 20 years from now.
Right.
And when you look at all the studies on loneliness, not committing to anybody, not staying put, not doing any of these things which former generations took for granted. Like, if I had moved 10 times for career, I wouldn't be living next to my son. I couldn't help him because I'd be off chasing the next stupid thing. I mean, and I'm sure I could have earned more money if I moved to the West Coast when I was in the movie business, whatever. But I'm not saying I did that as a sacrifice. I did that because I love our house and I do hands-on carpentry and stuff. And it's a project, but thank God we got, quote, stuck where we were because we've been able to build something. So I think even the upward mobility, we encourage people like, hey, it's a no-brainer. They're offering you more money. Go. Wait a minute. Then you're going to be the next statistic of someone who doesn't have anybody nearby in a community to help you with childcare that and that loves you. I mean, these are very obvious, basic things we've sort of let go. And I think your book's, Pregnant Girl speaks to these issues directly and also obliquely, because you're talking about the importance of a kind of a life that's one thing. It's not like, well, I'm having kids and then I'm trying to get this. You're putting the package together. Do you think that's a fair description?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think what I'm saying is why can't young families have the whole package?
That's what I think.
Right. And I think, people tell them they can't. And I'm saying you can. And my life is an example of that. The work that we do at Generation Hope is an example of that. And hopefully it inspires more people to, help to create this reality, for other families, for other young families. You can have the whole package.
Yeah. And I would encourage people watching this In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer with Nicole Lynn Lewis, author of Pregnant Girl, to use all the links we're going to put up to get in touch with her and her organization, support them. And it's a no-brainer. Buy the book. And, I said at the beginning of this interview, and I'm going to say it again, I delayed the publication of my book so I could rewrite sections of it and include quotes from Nicole and endorse what she was doing, because at last the cavalry had come over the hill and rescued me from saying, look, having too few examples of people to point to. And so Nicole and her book came into sight through an interview I was listening to on Fresh Air. And it was like, I can breathe a sigh of relief. Now I can point to someone and say what she said, do what she's doing. So don't, keep going, Nicole, because basically you're my number one example of someone who's doing everything right. And the other little piece of housekeeping is that please go to the porchcourses.com. Porch Courses run by Gareth Higgins, a friend of mine who's a founder of the Wild Goose Festival. And we're doing a course in January, February, based on my new book that's coming out, Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy. And I quote Nicole in the book. I talk about her as an example of someone who's done something, because our lives overlap so closely in terms of just our experience of family and children. So let me just wrap up by asking you how your family is right now. I know you've got a big age range, and how are things going?
And we're good. Everybody's good. Our oldest, as I said, she's finishing up college, which has not been easy with the pandemic. So we've been, helping her navigate that. And then we have a 12-year-old who's in 7th grade in middle school, and she's been doing really well, even with, remote and going in person. And then we have our 3 tornadoes now. It was 2 tornadoes when I was writing the book, and that was our 3-year-old and our 5-year-old boys. And then I just had a 5th child. Our youngest, Devin, is 4 months old. So he's now a part of the 3 tornadoes running through our house. Yeah. But everybody's good. Everybody's healthy. And, we're very blessed and very fortunate.
You came from some sort of a spiritual background as well. I've sort of walked away from my evangelical fundamentalist background. You talk about it a little bit. Your mom, I think, was she Roman Catholic?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Catholic.
Can you talk about that a little bit? Because a lot of people who watch my listen and watch and do these things, because I've written books like Why I'm an Atheist Who Believes in God and other Crazy for God, my spiritual journey out of evangelicalism, but not away from a certain spirituality and sense of things. Can you talk about that a little bit? You were sort of you went to church, you did all this, and where are you at now? I'm not asking you for a theological declaration, but I'm just curious. And then,
right.
Yeah,
I grew up Catholic. My mom, my mom was raised Catholic. My mom raised my daughter and my sister and I Catholic. My dad wasn't necessarily, religious. And when I probably started going back to church, in college, I wasn't really connected with a church. And then started going back to church after college. And my husband, who I had met in college, he was raised kind of with a Baptist background. And so, we knew we wanted to get married. So when I graduated from college, we started looking for a church together. And so we go to a non-denominational church in the DC area, and we love it. We've been there since before we got married. We're going to celebrate 14 years together in a couple weeks, catching up to you and Jeannie. But yeah, and so it's been great. I mean, I think what was important for both of us was to find a church with practical application, wanting to walk away from a sermon or a service feeling like, okay, I have some concrete things that I know I want to do to, do good in the world or do good in my home and in my marriage, and to feel connected, and to have a community. Those were the things that I think were really important to us. So that's kind of what we found at the church that we're at now.
Yeah, and the church that you're in now, is it predominant? When you look around, are there white and black people together and brown people and other people, or is it like so many other churches, it's pretty much black or white or whatever?
Yeah, it's a black church for the most part. And it's been interesting trying to find a congregation that is really and truly diverse. I think that has been a challenge, and I think it always has been a challenge, and I think it continues to be a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think there's anything particularly, wrong with going to a church which is predominantly black or white or whatever. It's just too bad that that's part of the national landscape, because you'd hope there's some exceptions. And it's always amazing to me to think the Southern Baptists and whatever it was, broke away from the General Baptists in order to support slavery. So there have been problems with Christianity in America, little problems like slave galleries in your church. So, anyway, we're kind of wrapping this up. I just want to let people know that we have links to Generation Hope and Nicole's fantastic book, Pregnant Girl, and on our show page. And we want everybody to support you. We want your book to just keep selling and selling and selling. And then I want you to write another book telling us more things. And I also think you have a novel in you. So
thank you.
I'll be out there promoting that when you do it. You're a hell of a writer, Nicole.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And congrats on your upcoming book. I have my advanced copy, and I can't wait to dig in.
Start a podcast and interview me.
I know, so many people have said it, but I feel like there's so many wonderful podcasts, yours being one of them. Like,
well, what we could do is combine, if you ever want to do a podcast, have mine, and then interview me and other people, or come and co-host one with me, because maybe
I will. Yeah.
I mean, maybe we can't go to black and white churches, but we can do a podcast. We can do an older and younger, grandparent, parent. That wouldn't be a bad thing.
Yes, exactly. I would love that.
Well, literally all the best. And again, you pass on to Grace Mangino my thanks for her responsiveness and her sweetness of getting us, because we had tried to book you and then you were having the baby and everything else. And she hung in there with us. It's wonderful. Thank her for making this work. And tell Grace to work with you on bring Ernie, my producer, because with me, it's like just throwing it into the thing. It just goes off in the wind. Ernie actually gets things done. So tell Grace to contact Ernie and just say, look, we have this young couple, or we have this guy or this girl or whatever, who have a good story to tell. And if you wanted to be on there with them and help them tell it, fine. But, I would love to talk to some young people about their journeys.
No, thank you for that invitation. We'll definitely work on that.
That you've helped, yes. And you let us know if you need someone to get out there and help raise funds, whatever it may be, help support you. You let us know how to, what you need practically, because I really, really believe in what you're doing.
Thank you. We'll definitely take you up on that. And we appreciate just the platform to be able to share more today.
Well, you are much loved.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.